Hi, I'm Ian McDowell, Senior Vice President with SR Snodgrass. We have a special edition of the podcast today that I'm thrilled about. Jen Cryder is the CEO of the Pennsylvania Institute of CPAs. She's a dear friend of mine and a longtime friend of the firm, one of the most powerful voices in the industry in the state of Pennsylvania. I think it's going to be a great show, so sit down, relax, and enjoy.
Welcome to another presentation from SR Snodgrass as part of our ongoing podcast series. I'm Lenore Seifer, the Director of Human Resources here at Snodgrass, and today I am welcoming Jen Cryder from the PICPA to the podcast. Welcome, Jen.
Lenore, thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
And we're excited to have you here as well. So Jen, I would like to get started by learning a little bit more about you. I know that you are currently the CEO of the PICPA. Mm-hmm. Could you give us a little bit of a background as to your background within the industry and how you got to the current position?
Absolutely. Just like any sort of career story, there were some twists and turns, but I feel so honored and privileged to be in the role of CEO at the Pennsylvania Institute of CPAs because we do this incredibly important work. I'm a CPA myself, and so that means a lot to me, the work that the organization does. I spent about 15 years in public accounting. So when I was studying accounting in school, I started an internship, just like so many folks do, and ended up staying with the firm where I did that internship for about 15 years. So I went from intern all the way up to senior manager, and it was in the Philadelphia area. The firm that I started with actually was probably very similar to Snodgrass in terms of size and some of those sorts of things. And I loved being at a firm to start my career that was a place where I could get to know everyone. I got to know a lot of clients early on in my career because of that kind of high connectivity. And I got to experience a lot of different things. So early in my career, I was, on an audit one day and then doing bank reconciliations and payroll work the next day. I tended to stay away from the tax department as an auditor. But nonetheless, that really broad experience early in my career was incredibly valuable to me when I look back now. I think different types of firms fit different people, but for me, that high-touch connectivity was really important. During the 15 years that I was at the firm, they merged twice. So I found a lot of opportunity in that. I went from, maybe the firm was 75 people when I started. 15 years later, as I was a senior manager, the firm was, I think, 1,300 people around the country. So I found an incredible opportunity in watching the firm scale in that way and what it meant to change as the firm grew. And began to specialize not only in nonprofits, but really specifically in nonprofit audit work and single audits and things like that. I loved seeing the impact that my work as a CPA could make on an organization, getting to know a client, their story, their challenges, their people, celebrate the successes with them, and then using my kind of financial skill set to help support that. So I loved public accounting and all of those years. I honestly wasn't planning on leaving, but then the opportunity came up to join the team at the PICPA. So about 10 years ago, I did that. I wasn't sure, like I said, but when I learned more about PICPA, I learned about the impact that the organization makes there. And so I came in as the chief financial officer and added on chief operating officer. So for a number of years, I kind of did that dual role where I was able to not only oversee the financial resources of the organization, but then also adding in the people and the strategy and all of the operational work. So really loved that role. And then about 3 years ago, had the opportunity to move into the CEO spot at PICPA. So it's been a lot of twists and turns, but an incredible career. The list of moments I never would have imagined in my career keeps growing. So I love that challenge and the learning and getting to meet CPAs and practitioners all across the Commonwealth.
That's a big change in terms of going from in public accounting, because if people leave, most often they just go within industry, one of the clients, things like that. Mm-hmm. But you switched to completely support the profession.
I joke I've stayed as close to public accounting as humanly possible without the timesheet.
without the timesheet. I like that. Billable hours are a little different now, right? So thank you for sharing that. It's really interesting to hear how your progression went from, that internship, which is a way that we still hear of progressions happening a lot too, with students getting involved early on and getting to learn about firms. I also liked hearing about the different opportunities you had at a firm. And it's something that we talk about closely within our recruiting team. And when we're talking with students about the size of the firm matters and finding the right one for the right students, because I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on it. Working for the size of firm that you did, you get to see and experience the whole audit pretty early on. And you even mentioned client interactions early on.
Yeah. I attribute a lot of where I am today to that experience, right? So being in a firm where the partner that I worked for was super invested in my career progression really early on. And so I will never forget the moment, I think I was a senior, where the partner said to me, okay, you're going to do the audit committee presentation now. We're done the audit. You've seen it from start to finish. To your point, early in your career, you see that from start to finish. And he said, so you're ready to present now to the audit committee. And I laughed because I thought it was a joke. Because in my mind, you clearly don't do that before you're at least a manager, right? And he was like, no, I'm not joking. I'm serious. I think I got the opportunity as a professional to grow and develop in the most incredible way because the people and the team around me were really invested in that and were looking out for what's that next opportunity that I can give to her that's going to kind of push her outside of her comfort zone and challenge a little bit.
That makes a big difference. And your progression within the PICPA also kind of feels like a natural progression of learning about the financial piece of things, adding the people part, and now managing the entire organization. So congrats to you on that.
Thanks.
Can you tell us more about the PICPA as a whole? I'm curious to hear how big it is member-wise maybe. And obviously we know that you support the accounting profession, but I know there's so much more to it. Could you give us a high level of some of that?
Yeah. So the PICPA is 128 years old. We were I think the second professional society to be formed. So this goes way back to kind of the beginning of where the CPA profession came from. Our legacy is rooted that far back. And the organization was formed around protecting the CPA license. So much of my work as CEO is informed by that legacy and that incredible history. The work of PICPA is very focused around advocacy. We just define that a lot more broadly today than we did 128 years ago. So I'll touch on what some of those things are, but more or less, the organization exists to support CPAs, the firms and organizations they work for, and the students coming into the profession. If I had to encapsulate it into one little bullet point, that's what it would be. Now, I think the way that PICPA did that 100 years ago was probably a very specific set of things or maybe a shorter list than it is today. Because today, when you think about what does the profession need and what does every CPA need to be successful, depending on what point of career they're at and where their career has taken them, that list has become incredibly varied now. And so that is our challenge as an organization, but also what makes the work so very interesting. Because there are countless problems to solve or opportunities to create. When I became CEO, I had the chance to set a vision for the organization, and it was really rooted in that. Having been in practice for a long time, I said to my team, if we're not solving real problems or creating real opportunities, a practitioner is going to struggle to connect to the organization. And so we've built so much around that since.
So I did not realize, if you think back to when it was the organization started, 1800s then basically, so lots of history there. And if you think back, some of the services that are now commonly offered, there was no inclination that the organization would be supporting them. So lots of change and growth over that long history too, and what a strong organization it continues to be, and very relevant. Could you tell us about some of those challenges and opportunities that you had mentioned then?
Yeah, absolutely. I said that a lot of our work focuses around advocacy. When we think about advocacy, it covers 3 areas for us. So it's certainly government relations and our advocacy in Harrisburg. And a lot of CPAs know us for that work. If there is a state tax issue coming up in the General Assembly, the legislators are calling us and saying, hey, can you convene the CPA community to help us write this tax law or help us think through how this is going to impact the tax practitioner community? So that's a cornerstone and a very important part of the advocacy work that we do. It's not going anywhere. But we've added a lot of advocacy around licensure, especially right now as the profession is facing some incredible talent challenges. We think about our work in professional and technical standards as advocacy. So we're doing a lot of work right now looking at how do we keep the audit relevant to the users of financial statements and what is the right regulation around that so that the audit can continue to be innovative, serving the capital markets and the banks and the individuals that use the financial statements. But how do we make sure regulation keeps pace with that and makes sense? So we think of all of that as advocacy. And then finally, the third area is our CPA Foundation. We do a lot of work on behalf of the profession across Pennsylvania to attract talent to the profession and to help retain them in the profession. So it is advocating just to a different audience. Instead of to a regulator or to a legislator, we're more often finding ourselves now advocating to a high school student of why they should choose accounting as first step their college major, but then second step their career. So we spend a lot of time in that advocacy space. We do a lot of other things as well, member connections and events, thought leadership, content, learning, so many other things. But there are no shortage of opportunities to create and challenges to solve for. So I think we're going to be busy for quite a while.
I think you're right about that. I know, too, that there are so many leadership opportunities for CPAs and those in the profession to partner with the PICPA as well, you know, from, as you had mentioned, even authoring articles and different things like that as well, and helps to promote them and the industry, too, then.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to hear a little bit more about your thoughts. I mean, I feel like there's so many different topics that we can go down. One of them I'm curious about, and you had mentioned about licensure. There's a lot going on with licensure right now, and it's one of the big changes within public accounting and impacts people presumably in a positive way, especially the candidates. What are your thoughts on that? Guide us through some of that and where things stand and kind of how we got here too.
Yeah, a lot is changing on licensure. So I would say that at PICPA, we focused most of the last 2 years hearing from the profession about the challenges they were facing in attracting talent. The demographics very clearly are showing us that the generations coming into the workforce are far smaller. And so the accounting profession is going to have to work really hard to continue to get their share of top talent because the pie is shrinking. So we heard that feedback loud and clear and began to look at the model for licensure. Very specifically, are the experience and education requirements the right mix to provide access to the profession for candidates? So we're seeing a lot move very quickly right now, but I think one important point is we've been working on this behind the scenes for a long time. So one of the really interesting parts of my role is I get to represent Pennsylvania nationally in these conversations. We're a large state. We've got one of the biggest groups of CPAs in the country. And so it's been incredible for me. I mentioned that list of experiences I never would have imagined. Mm-hmm. It's been an incredible opportunity for me to be literally at the table as these decisions are being made and say, well, here's what Pennsylvania thinks. I don't know that we've always used our voice in that way. And I can assure you that Pennsylvania's voice really has been included in the discussion. So we're seeing states start to change their legislation because the mechanisms by which you become a CPA are included in state law, right? So to make changes to that requires every state to open up their CPA law to make that change. So this is where the work in Harrisburg comes in, right? We're moving to a new model. I'll take you through what that model is, and then next tell you kind of where each state is at in that change.
That sounds great.
First of all, the model that we're moving to is going to retain the current pathway, which is licensure based on passing the exam, 150 hours of education, and 1 year of experience. It's not going away. And I actually think that for some candidates, that's going to be a really great option. We're going to add a second pathway to licensure that will include passing the CPA exam, a bachelor's degree, not necessarily in accounting, but at least with the accounting concentration, and 2 years of work experience. I think what this does for candidates is gives them the opportunity to get into the workforce sooner. So while the addition of the second pathway to licensure is great for candidates, I also think it can be really great for firms as they begin to rethink hiring models and some of those sorts of things. The licensure pathway is the headline. It's critically important. What I heard from Snodgrass and every other firm in Pennsylvania, though, is as you go and change licensure, don't break our ability to practice across state lines. I know that Snodgrass has offices in more than one state, and as you look at the future, that's only going to become more important. So also in this legislative change, we're building a fix to mobility. If we're doing our jobs right, substance over form, it'll look no different to you and everybody on the team. But the mechanisms kind of underneath there are changing really drastically so that the ability to practice across state lines stays tied to the individual and their license, not necessarily what the state level laws are. So two big changes.
The reciprocity part of things is really important, especially for firms such as Snodgrass, as you mentioned, with offices in other states, and also with clients in various states as well, too, that those borders become very difficult if there's always a different rule and regulation and guideline as to what that looks like to practice there.
Yep.
So what does the timeline look like for this?
Yes. So we have drafted legislative language here in Pennsylvania. We've got bill sponsors lined up, and our language is going through the Legislative Reference Bureau right now.
Okay, that's great.
It is great. We've been working for a long time on this. And we will introduce a bill in the Senate and also in the House here in Pennsylvania. So we're going to have two bills. It just sort of keeps both options and avenues open for us. And 3 of the 4 bill sponsors are CPAs. So we're able to use those CPA legislators that we have relationships with. Not only can they help move the bill, but they went through this process so they understand it and can really speak to it.
Yeah, some of the challenges.
We're writing effective dates in our bills of January 1st, 2026. So fingers crossed, if all goes well, the bill will be introduced sometime in May, move through this summer. Let's hope the governor's signing it in the fall, and that would make it effective 1/1/26. So for a candidate who applies for their license beginning in 1/1/26, if we hit that timeline, they would have the option of getting licensed with the bachelor's pathway. That means that, again, if we stay on that timeline, and it's a big if, candidates that are in school right now going through the process could have access to that bachelor's degree pathway. The uncertainty comes into play in how fast the legislature can move.
Of course.
We're going to see that uncertainty compound because each state is on a different timeline and each state is going to have different effective dates. So that's where PICPA can be an incredibly important resource, certainly for the firms, but for the candidates and practitioners as well. Everyone is aligned on the pathway change and also the mobility fix. So the content or the substance, everyone's doing the same thing. We're just going to see across different states, different timelines for getting this enacted, and then different effective dates. PICPA can be the source of information and education to maybe not eliminate the confusion, but minimize it.
And that's really important just because every day almost you hear about another state starting to add this and trying to keep track of it on your own would be pretty much impossible. So that doing that is very much appreciated for sure. So you had mentioned briefly about representing Pennsylvania at a national level, though. Can you tell us a little bit more about your work with the AICPA and how that ties, especially for those in Pennsylvania?
Yes, I have had a couple of really interesting opportunities working both with AICPA and NASBA. With AICPA, the state society network is pretty strong. There's a lot of collaboration. So I work and speak often with my colleagues in all of the other states. I truly know them all. And all of us are collaborating often with AICPA. So whether it is on this topic of licensure or so many other topics that we're talking about, that dialogue is ongoing, and there's a lot of connectivity there. So that's more informal influence, I would say, just having those relationships, so that if you were to have a client question come up in the state of Montana, I know Alan, and I can call Alan and I can get you an answer. I would say more formally with AICPA, I'm on the executive committee of their private company practices section, which focuses on serving independent firms that are sort of middle market focused, like Snodgrass, on transforming their business model. As you think about the way firms are changing, there's so much to talk about there. So I do have a couple of formal roles like that nationally. And then similar with NASBA, NASBA works with all the state boards on the regulatory side. I've gotten the opportunity to have a couple of both formal and informal roles there. I think the thing that's most important to CPAs in Pennsylvania is in representing Pennsylvania, been able to build that network of contacts across the country. And so whether it is a state board regulatory question or something where we need the advocate, I can get to all of those places pretty quickly.
That is very helpful, I'm sure, for so many different people, just because, again, businesses aren't confined in a small areas. You know, it's not only within a state, but outside as well, too. With thinking about the history of the PICPA and how much has changed during its history overall, I'm curious as to what your thoughts are. First, I guess, with Pennsylvania as a whole, you know, how do we see the demographics within Pennsylvania changing? And especially for within the profession of those coming into it, you know, how is that looking?
Pennsylvania's in an interesting spot because here in the Northeast, the population's not growing. And on a net basis, there's more outflow than inflow. So I talked to my colleagues in states like Florida or Texas, where everyone's moving to, and they have a very different take on the profession than we do here in the Northeast. So we have certainly demographic challenges. The populations are getting smaller. And then, you know, sort of compounding that here in the Northeast, we've got those population net outflows. So I do think that the pressure and the challenge is more acute to attract and retain the best talent. But Pennsylvania has a lot going for it. Don't take that to mean that the profession's in trouble here. We've got, I think, more colleges and universities than any other state. And I get to interact with many of those accounting programs, meet the students and the educators. We have fantastic accounting programs across Pennsylvania, many of which are here in this Pittsburgh area, but across the state. So every time I am interacting with an educator or a student, I leave more optimistic about the future of the profession than I was before. Like I said, Pennsylvania is one of the largest groups of CPAs. So there are close to 30,000 licensees here in Pennsylvania, CPAs. And based on the data that we can see, I think that, well, I'll just speak to PICPA's membership because I know that data. We know that more than half of our membership is 50 or older, and about a third of our membership is 60 or older.
That's interesting.
We can extrapolate that data then to the larger licensee population, and pretty quickly you start to paint a picture in your mind of, as those two sections of our profession start to retire, some imminently and some over the next, say 10 years, that really creates a retirement cliff that we're going to struggle to solve for. And if CPAs can't provide the services that individuals, businesses, and the economies and capital markets need, what's going to happen? We said earlier in our conversation, the pie is shrinking. So there's definitely less talent coming in. This is where you really start to get to the crux of, hey, the business model of an accounting firm has to change a lot in order to solve for that. It's been a fascinating question to sort of be in the middle of discussing.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. Anything you'd like to share?
I think that it's a couple of different factors. So the changes to licensure are absolutely intended to help alleviate the pressure there. But if we only do that, if we only change the licensure pathway, we will not solve the problem. We've got to be focused on a couple of things at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, each of us have a lane to contribute. We've got to change the image of the profession more broadly, right? Because until a high school student is no longer going to the family barbecue hearing how terrible being a CPA is, we're going to keep having this problem. It doesn't matter what our licensure pathway is. So there's a lot of work to do on the image of the profession. We have to make those intro to accounting classes really engaging and interesting, the ones that everybody in business school takes. Mm-hmm. We can't have this mindset that those first few classes are meant to weed out everyone and just get the best talent. We've got to make firms a place where you not only want to start your career, but you want to stay and build a career long term. So I think that there's a lot that firms can do there. And then, I think PICPA is at the intersection of all of those, really pulling it together, saying, okay, firms, here's some stuff you can work on. Educators, here's what you can work on. We'll take the kind of image campaign that has to happen in the public. It's everybody working together.
It is for sure. And as you mentioned too, I really think that the licensure, as you mentioned, will help some so that those that want to get started in their careers a little sooner can, or even potentially some of those that said, I don't quite have 150 and I'd still like to consider that.
Yeah.
They're still going to have that opportunity then without additional schooling, which I think is a great opportunity. I'm curious to hear your thoughts too on the technology side of things, and how that plays into either helping a little bit with some of the retirements coming up, as well as keeping accounting very future focused and making sure that it doesn't become outdated as well.
Mm-hmm. When I talk to students, one of the most common questions I get is, I was thinking about majoring in accounting, but I might change my mind because from what I'm seeing, I think AI or robots, whatever, fill in the blank, I think AI is going to take all the work, so I won't have a job as an accountant. And I love when I get that question because I don't think that they could be more wrong in that question, right? I think that technology is changing this profession for the better. When I look at what CPAs do, ultimately at the end of the day, CPAs create trust, growth, and opportunity. Technology, robots, and artificial intelligence are not going to be able to do that. And so it's become very clear to me as I've been focused on how technology is changing the profession that the more technology you add in, the more important it is to be human at the same time and to bring that human element. And so I've been thinking a lot about how do we help CPAs lean into that? Without question, professionals beginning their career right now are going to be able to leverage technology in ways that I couldn't have even imagined when I started my career. That's pretty cool. That's going to get them to the interesting work more quickly, right? Into the advisory work. Even if it's within the scope of an audit or a tax engagement, the technology, it's pretty clear, will do a lot of the compliance work in the next couple of years. I think we will absolutely see that. That allows the professional to then look at what the output is and say, how do I advise my client, or how do I think about the business strategically? I think that that's a fascinating opportunity for a student as they're thinking about choosing a career. And especially when you frame it within, you can use your financial knowledge, use all of these technology tools, and figure out how to create trust, growth, and opportunity for your client.
And it makes it much more engaging for them at a much earlier stage too, most likely then. If you're not the one doing the reconciliations or, some of the trial balances and different things like that, and you're getting more into some of the work that you find interesting, I would think that most likely they may be more interested in staying within the profession for a longer period of time if you're not getting caught up in some of the more repetitious.
I absolutely think you're right. I think back to what I did in my first internship, and I loved my firm. I had an incredible experience there, but a lot of my internship was spent at a photocopier or like footing numbers. Well, no one's done that for many, many years, thank goodness. So I do think that our profession has this really compelling story for college students looking at different majors. When we think about our profession as a technology career where you use financial information and financial acumen, that gets a different reaction from a student.
little bit of rebranding is what I'm hearing there.
Absolutely. That it goes back to the image of the profession.
Exactly. And even as you had mentioned, speaking with high school students and just trying to help at a much younger age of giving them a clear picture of what it really looks like, you know, what you thought it was versus what it actually is. It's a lot brighter then.
We did some research on this topic. You were mentioning high school students. Our data showed that more than half of high school students have their mind made up while in high school what their college major will be.
That's pretty impressive that they are able to decide that.
Can you believe it? Yeah, I had no idea in high school. I had none. So we have to be telling that story a lot earlier.
Absolutely. Jen, thanks so much for being here with us today. It's been a great conversation. And just to kind of wrap up, I'm curious as to where you see the future within next 5-10 years. What is this looking like for public accounting?
Yeah, that's a great question. I just want to take a quick second, though, before we go to that, and just thank you, Lenore, for the opportunity to be here and chat today, and also to thank Snodgrass for their partnership, because the work that PICPA does on behalf of the profession would be absolutely impossible without support of your firm and the many individuals here that are engaged with PICPA and helping us to move forward all of the different things we talked about today. So we really value that partnership and look forward to it continuing for many, many years to come. When I think about the future, I am filled with optimism, sincerely. I think that there is more opportunity than ever for CPAs. As we look at the world around us today, I think that what CPAs bring to the table is more needed than ever. I said earlier in our conversation, in my mind, CPAs power trust, growth, and opportunity. I think the world could use some of the trust that we bring. And when you start to think about how we could apply that, I think that gets really interesting. So certainly CPAs will continue to serve clients through audits and tax work and all of those things. I don't think any of those are going away. I think technology will change the way those happen and the way that work gets done. I can't wait to see it happen, because in the next couple of years, I predict it will look nothing like it does today. So that's exciting and filled with a lot of opportunity in my mind. When we expand that skill set and that trust, though, into other areas, I do see the future opening up a lot of different growth opportunities for CPAs and accounting firms. Certainly artificial intelligence is providing us some great productivity tools right now, right? Like helping write an email or something. But when we take the ability to look at a system and put trust around it, like what we do in an audit right now, if we think about the whole world of artificial intelligence and cybersecurity and all of these things that are emerging at a very rapid pace, I really think there's a place for CPAs in all of that, not as technologists necessarily, but as that trusted voice who can come in, look at what's happening, understand it, advise a client through it, and say, here's how we're going to bring some elements of trust to this so that a system similar to a capital market can function really effectively. So I don't exactly know what that is going to look like, but it's an incredible opportunity in my mind for all of us together as a profession to be at the table creating those answers together.
It sounds like the future is bright, and especially within public accounting. And I can't thank you enough for being here today and for all that you have done for the profession. Thank you, Jen.
My pleasure.
At SR Snodgrass, we're always growing. We have offices in Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Ohio, and West Virginia. Whether you're entry level, senior level, or somewhere in between, we invite you to check us out. Go to our website at www.srsnodgrass.com, follow us on LinkedIn, and join us on our quest for the best.